Mr. President, thank you. I rise today to discuss the fight against ISIS and the debate that we're having here in the Senate and across the country about the authorization for the use of military force, known by the acronym AUMF. The debate about the appropriate use of force is, I believe, healthy for our country. The American people deserve to know when and how our service members are going to be deployed to protect our national security interests. All senators in this body have an abiding obligation to take the time to learn about this issue, to ask questions about our strategy, to thoroughly debate the strategy and the issues that relate to the authorization for the use of force. And then, of course, we have an obligation to vote on the grave question of the use of military force. It's been 6 months since ISIS began its major offensive in Iraq, taking control of key border crossings in the city of Mosul. The President has laid out, since that time, a strategy for combating ISIS through all available means: military action, diplomatic coalition building, coordinating efforts to cut off financing and recruitment, and providing humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, the administration has taken these actions under previous authorizations. In these weeks and months, I've consulted with administration officials, both military and civilian, outside experts, and former diplomats, as I know many of our colleagues have. I've also listened to my constituents in Pennsylvania. We owe it to the American people to have a debate and a vote on a new authorization for military force, for the use of military force, that clarifies and, if necessary, places limitations upon the President's authority in this fight against ISIS. We know that 1,830 service members, 91 of whom were from Pennsylvania, have been killed in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. 3,482 service members, of which 197 were from Pennsylvania, have been killed in Operation Iraqi Freedom. So 2 conflicts, and in Pennsylvania alone, the killed in action number was 91 in Afghanistan, 197 in Iraq. Thousands and thousands more have been wounded in action from Pennsylvania and from across the country, some of them grievously, permanently injured because of their service. And I'm mindful, as I know many are here, that with both the 2001 and 2002 authorizations for the use of force, Congress moved very quickly to take that action. And I understand that. We know that in hindsight, that in the case of Iraq at least, mistakes were made because leaders did not take the time to debate and ask tough questions and demand answers to those tough questions. So I believe it's appropriate for us to do the following: thoroughly debate this AUMF, as we should every time we consider sending U.S. service members into harm's way. And second, to be prepared to continually reassess and debate our strategy against ISIS to ensure it is achieving our national security goals. We all hope, to develop an AUMF that has broad bipartisan support. However, our priority must be to give the President clear and specific authority to take the fight to ISIS, or I should say continue to take the fight to ISIS. The administration should have come forward with a recommendation early in the process for what they would like to see in an authorization for the use of military force. I welcome Secretary Kerry's testimony before the Foreign Relations Committee yesterday. That hearing was an important step in the right direction. It's appropriate for the Congress to not only conduct rigorous oversight of the executive branch's decisions about military force, but also from time to time to take steps to shape or place boundaries around the administration's strategy. I appreciate Chairman Menendez's efforts to craft an AUMF proposal that satisfies the needs of the administration and the concerns from both sides of the aisle and indeed across our country. The Congress should move forward with an authorization for the use of military force which addresses the following. First, this AUMF should not allow for any significant deployment of U.S. troops in traditional ground combat roles. This is consistent with what the President has determined is necessary at this time, and we also need to see nations in the region step up to do the fighting. We can't just have, to use an old expression from Pennsylvania, coat holders. That's someone who says, you go do the fighting, I'll hold your coat while you fight. We need a real coalition, which we have in place now, but it has to be built and strengthened and fortified and sustained. That coalition, especially if in the case of members of the coalition from the region, they have to be a coalition that will contribute fighters to the battlefield, because it's their region. It's their conflict as much as it is other nations in the coalition. So when I say we cannot have a coalition of coat holders, I'm serious about that. We need a coalition that will help us. We've already done a lot. Our people have, our taxpayers have, our soldiers have. We need a real coalition who will do the fighting. We also know that ISIS has taken American hostages before and will try to do so again. If, for example, the administration has a chance to bring one of these Americans home, I want them, the administration, to take action expeditiously and with clear authority. If the administration disagrees with the current proposal for authorization for exceptional circumstances or operations, for example, a search and rescue operation inside Syria or the recovery of an American hostage, they should propose, the administration should propose language that they find acceptable to use in those difficult situations. Secondly, this authorization for force, should it come about, should not be geographically limited. ISIS and its associated forces do not and will not respect sovereign borders. However, I'd like to see language that requires the administration consult closely with Congress if they want to consider a U.S. military operation against ISIS in countries beyond Iraq and Syria. Expanding this fight geographically could have the unintended effect of prompting unrest in other countries or pushing recruits into the arms of ISIS. Third, this authorization for the use of force should have a reasonable timeline, something on the order of 3 years, with the explicit option for the administration to extend it a bit longer if needed. We cannot know exactly how long it will take us and our coalition partners to degrade and ultimately defeat this terrorist organization. However, the AUMF should not be open-ended in the way that the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs were. We've seen how difficult it is to shift gears or even repeal an existing authorization for the use of military force. Fourth and finally, this authorization must also address the non-military components of the administration's strategy. I was one of the first members to call for greater support for the moderate, well-vetted Syrian opposition. We know that opposition, especially in the north, is fractured and suffering, especially under a continual onslaught from Mr. Assad's barrel bombs, not to mention other actions he's taken against the opposition. Although efforts to support them are ramping up, the brutal Assad regime has done significant damage, and that's an understatement. Further, the Assad regime continues to commit unspeakable atrocities against Syrian civilians, starving, torturing, or indiscriminately murdering them in violation of international law and UN Security Council resolutions, and that's plural. I have also emphasized on a bipartisan basis with Senator Rubio several years ago the importance of cutting off ISIS's finances. This could include airstrikes against known oil smuggling pipelines or additional sanctions against facilitators. I should say with Senator Rubio that the financing efforts of the cutting off of the financing was this year. I've worked with him in other years on other parts of Syria policy. As we've heard multiple administration leaders say, there is no purely military solution to this conflict with ISIS. I would also say that if we have an authorization for force, that this bill should include strict reporting requirements that press the administration to answer these questions and answer a series of questions, among others. First, what are you going to do to support the moderate opposition in Syria? I've raised this over and over and over again with the administration and still don't have satisfactory answers. Number two, what steps are you taking to address the Assad regime's brutal barrel bomb campaign? And what are you doing to bring about a political settlement to the conflict in Syria? Third, how is the military campaign helping to cut off the financial support that ISIS is receiving, as I mentioned before? Mr. President, there is strong bipartisan agreement that ISIS poses a clear and proximate, if not immediate, threat to our national security interests and those of our partners. I believe we can reach the same level of bipartisan agreement on an authorization for the use of military force. We have no greater or more sacred responsibility than to carefully and thoroughly consider when and how we send American men and women in uniform into harm's way. I urge my colleagues in both parties to engage in this debate and to work expeditiously to pass an authorization for the use of military force. I would have preferred, and I know many would have preferred, that we passed and will have passed a bill before we adjourn this year, knowing that in this holiday season there are service members already deployed away from home from their families to support this Operation Inherent Resolve. If we cannot get that done by the end of this year, or the debate wouldn't be fully developed enough to pass an authorization, we must get it done early in 2015. It must be among our first orders of business in the new year and the new Congress when we come back in early January. This is a very grave matter. It's among the highest and most difficult responsibilities that the Congress has, and I believe we must discharge that obligation with a full debate, with a debate that's well informed, and a debate that every member participates in before we make a decision about the authorization for the use of force.